Straightened out here. I want to thank you for that unenthusiastic applause and that sitting ovation. You want to come up and teach me there? Big Ed? Let's give Ed Hurst a round of applause here, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, an all-timer. Where are all the pansies that can't handle some little bit of rain and should have been here today? Anyway, we thank you all for coming, and we hope that we'll have your attention, because sometimes sports doesn't get the attention that I think it deserves as far as newscasts are concerned. Now, Jerry came up with a topic whereby he talks about how sports is integrated within a regular newscast on local television, which is kind of interesting. We who have worked in the sports department, and of course the news people are also aware of it, sometimes they think of the sports department as the toy department. But at the same time, because they say it's not necessarily that relevant, that we all really have to react to whatever goes on daily in our lives. However, all the people in the newsroom always want to work in the sports department because they think they know as much as the guys who are in the sports department. So that's been going on for a long time. But anyway, I'm going to introduce the panel first, and then we'll talk about some of the topics that we're going to talk about here. And I hate to put these on, but time marches on. Anyway, our panel, and as I read the introduction, when you start recognizing what you've accomplished, you can start coming up here to the dais. He's a local Philly guy whose voice is heard up and down the dial, a St. Joe's grad who ironically is a radio TV voice of Temple's major sports, football and basketball. And before that, in 1974, he joined KYW Radio as a freelance reporter. Quickly establishing himself, he became the station's main morning news and sports anchor since 1979. In addition to Temple play-by-play, he has broadcast preseason Eagles, the 76ers, the defunct USFL Philadelphia Stars, and has voiced NFL film highlights. He has also won 2 Pennsylvania AP awards and is a member of the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame. And in another labor of love, he has hosted the weekly Inside Golf TV show for 16 years, where we duffers can check out the local courses. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Donahue. Impressive applause there, Harry. You got your relatives here today or what? A twin born in Atlantic City, he's also made his mark at home by being inducted into our Broadcast Hall of Fame just last fall. A bundle of energy, he started as a writer at the Atlantic City Press, followed by a 10-year career as an executive in the casino industry. And he also dealt with the media, and he jumped into talk radio, has become known as the mayor of the morning in Atlantic City, moving through several stations in a 22-year career. He is now at WPG 1450, where he is also a consultant. His morning ratings have been as high as 69% of the audience, with the closest competitor just 11%. He also hosts a charity golf tournament, which has raised over $350,000 in just 6 years. He rises every morning early, and he hits the road at warp speed. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Hurley. If I list all the accomplishments of this guy, we'll be just in time for dinner. So starting a solid career in Buffalo, he arrived here in 1964, helping to launch Channel 17, and a career that netted 10 Emmy Awards. He became the legendary voice of Big Five basketball, joining KYW-TV in 1972. Extensive play-by-play experience included college and pros like the Syracuse Chiefs in baseball minor league, Buffalo Bills, Milwaukee Bucks, the Eagles, NFL film narration. And in 1979, he joined Channel 10, and I was privileged to share some sports anchor duties with him in the 80s. After leaving Channel 10, he excelled at Comcast Sportsnet with specials and interview shows for some 6 years. He was inducted into the Broadcast Hall of Fame in 2009. Like many of us, he has hit a ton of golf balls. Ladies and gentlemen, my buddy Al Meltzer. Another local from Lansdowne in Delaware County had made his Philadelphia mark with the induction into the Broadcast Pioneers Hall of Fame in 2006. He was a grad at Westchester University. His TV career started in Altoona and Lancaster. He also co-hosted the Access Hollywood Daily Entertainment News magazine, and at the same time was an anchor reporter at WBBM TV in Chicago, where he earned 27 Emmy Awards and other honors. Geez, give us some room to win a few awards here. Anyway, in 1997, he became an anchor at Channel 10, then moved over to Channel 3 in 2003, co-anchoring the 6 and 11 o'clock newscasts. He also won the AP, the Edward R. Murrow, and Sigma Delta Chi Awards for reporting. He's also fortunate to be married to the lovely Dawn Stensland, who has been a very popular TV anchor at Channel 3 and also at Channel 29. Here he is, Larry Menti. Our next local personality celebrates St. Patrick's Day seemingly every day. With that impish smile, it needs a green waistcoat and a shillelagh to walk around in. Anyway, the West Philly product and Villanova grad was a grad in sports administration. He became the Nova Sports Information Director. That led to a PR job with the Eagles, and owner Leonard Toews elevated him to general manager 5 years later. He was there for the Super Bowl and the playoff years under Dick Vermeil. He left the Birds after 14 years when Toews sold the team under financial pressure. He was always involved in numerous projects. The most famous, the 1974, he was a co-founder of the first Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House, which provides temporary homes at no cost for kids while undergoing treatment for various illnesses at local hospitals. And now there are over 300 such houses worldwide. Well, with too many awards to mention, who runs his own marketing firm, the very popular Irishman, Jim Murray. And still another homegrown Temple grad. He quickly landed radio jobs at 4 local stations in 5 years, angling toward TV. He landed a writing job at Channel 3 while anchoring sports at WHYY's Delaware News. That led to a weekend sports job at WCAU TV in 1989. And while at WHYY, he met Sue Serio, aforementioned earlier, whom he married a few years later. She got a talk show job in Buffalo. He followed and got a sports job at the same station. 3 years later, he was named weekend sports anchor here at Channel 29, and she followed, taking over the weather job, where she has been at 29 for 14 years. He has been nominated for 9 Emmys. He won the Mid-Atlantic Best Sports Anchor job in 2008 and 9. He left 29 some 4 years ago and launched into acting, as well as industrial films and commercials. Mr. Versatility, Bill Vargas, Billy V. All right, here's our star-studded panel, and our topic is far-ranging. Jerry decided that it was time to talk more about sports and how, again, as I've mentioned, we're integrated within the normal newscast and how it's changed over the past several decades, and how cable has really, in a sense, relegated local sports to sort of an afterthought in a way. Sports channels have really cut into the local sports time in a lot of ways. And it's cut the airtime for sports, and how assignment editors also relegate sports to its secondary status. Now we're going to look at some different topics here. There's a new college rule that they are now thinking about that could affect college and how the game is played, and whether or not it could possibly move into the NFL, and would also affect the Eagles. And we'll get to that momentarily. We'll talk about the Phillies. They've got a new manager. They're an older team. The 76ers, I don't know what they're doing, but they're losing games by 30, 40, and 50 points. And I guess they're in this so-called rebuilding thing, but I don't know how you can trade away all your scorers, get a bunch of basic amateurs out there on the floor, and expect to make money at the gate. but that's another story. The Flyers are in third place. They got some good goaltending, although Ed Snyder thinks that the Olympics are ruining the National Hockey League. So that's another thought. If you want to get into the gay football player that is ready to get into the NFL, we can do that. And also the Big Five, college basketball. And Villanova pulled out a squeaker last night in double overtime. And later on at the end, we'll have some questions from the audience. Hopefully you won't still be asleep at that time. All right, here's what's happened. Just this past Friday, I came across a story that really is starting to get a lot of traction. That a proposed new college football rule under review could affect up-tempo offenses if passed, and could affect the Eagles' fast-paced offense if brought into the NFL. Now, the theory is that they want to slow down the game because they think it's going to lead to injuries for players who are so exhausted on the defensive side that they haven't got time to catch their breath to keep up with these fast-paced offenses. Because in college you have a 40-second rule and to make a snap or get to the next play. They don't want you to take a snap until the clock reads 29 seconds. Some of these teams get these plays off within 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. This would give them an 11-second cushion for the defenses to catch their breath. But the offenses say, well, wait a minute. What does that mean about spiking the ball when you're running down the field in the 2-minute drill and you've got 7 or 8 seconds to do that and spike it and so on and so forth? Yeah, I'm mentioning Nick Saban, which is interesting because Alabama seems to win no matter what happens. They were one of the slowest teams. They had only 64 plays average per game. The teams with the fast-paced offense would run off as many as 80 plays. And you're right. Maybe they only have to snap the ball 20 or 30 times to win a football game.
Yeah, they're so good they can afford to do that.
Yeah. Harry, how about you?
Totally agree. They're calling it the 10-second rule. As Joe says, it's 11. It's part of the game. And if the defense is sucking wind, sucking air, then that's a part of preconditioning, preseason training, and just being ready for it. It would totally change the game. There was an analysis done of 5 key games that would have been, they can't say for sure, but they believe every evidence is that the game would have gone the other direction. The other team would have won if this rule was in effect. It's part of the game. It's exciting. Chip Kelly bringing it to the NFL, I think, is awesome. And I think it should stay. And I agree wholeheartedly with our colleague here that there'll be pushback. This is not going to go anywhere, I don't think.
Possibly. Yeah, one coach said, well, let me see if there's any data that we have as far as injuries are concerned, which brings up a very interesting point. Big Al.
I'm not buying any of that. The whole thing is with the National Football League in particular, they want to change things because it brings in a little more money maybe. The one thing that it does is it gives a team like Philadelphia an opportunity to score, okay? And it's very simple. He just gets the ball into the hands of the quarterback and the game keeps going. Now, all I can do is give you an analogy. Many, many years ago, the game of basketball did not allow you to dunk the ball, okay? Now, what if that was going on today? Basketball is a hell of a lot better today than it was 40 years ago. So forget about it. Don't listen to them. Watch and keep booing the Dallas Cowboys.
Larry.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert like the people that are on this panel. I probably am here to talk about sports integration into a newscast. But I will say, in just reporting on the topic, I will say that I did watch a panel of NFL executives who said even if this went through in college, and that's doubtful, it will never happen in the NFL because the hurry-up offense is so popular right now throughout the NFL. It just wouldn't happen. And they've gotten used to it, too. And it's become part of the marketing. So even if it happens in college, it won't go to the NFL.
Well, that's one reason that Chip Kelly is here in Philadelphia, because let's face it, the game is points. People want to see touchdowns, and when you do anything to cut back on that, if those guys on defense are out of shape, that's their problem. That's not the offense's problem. But Larry, you mentioned the newscast. How would you cover a story like this as far as sports department is concerned? Would you put this up higher in the newscast because it is such kind of a controversial change?
My feeling is this probably wouldn't make most newscasts. It might make it in Philadelphia, and a local newscast I'm talking about. It might make it in Philadelphia only because of Chip Kelly, maybe in New England, but it wouldn't, I don't think it would rise to the top of a newscast. A lot of it would depend on when it happens. If it happened during an Eagles season, it might, before an Eagles game, if the Eagles were hot. But no, stories like this don't get short-shifted most of the time. It really depends on circumstances and location. But I mean, does anybody agree or disagree? I think a story like this probably wouldn't get a lot of play in a local newscast.
Well, as long as it's a college issue, especially because college football doesn't exist hardly in this area. I mean, it's a pro football town, and unless it was brought to the front, affecting NFL teams, I think that's the only way they'd talk about it.
Right.
I don't think Angelo Catali's worried about slowing down the offenses in college football right now.
Billy.
Yeah, I completely agree with Larry. I don't think it would even get coverage for the most part. And I also agree with Larry that it wouldn't come into the NFL anyway, because they always pass rules to help offenses to get more points, not to help defenses. So,
Jimmy.
Having lived inside the NFL, it took them 33 ballots to elect Pete Rozelle. So when you get inside their politics, it's amazing. I remember when I was interviewing Dick Vermeil, who was a college coach coming into an NFL, and I told him, he stopped me in the middle of the interview, and he said, Jimmy, why would I come to Philadelphia? I said, what's that mean? He said, those fans. I said, well, forget that I'm the general manager, I'm a fan. I said, I'm going to tell you two things, and I'm going to be Jeremiah. I said, when you look at our films, we're so bad, you'll only get a standing ovation if you win the toss. And he did. And number two, I said, if you level with these people and tell the truth, they'll embrace you, you'll move to Philadelphia, you'll raise your family here, and you'll become a household word. And all those things have happened. So a whole premise of our panel, when I was listening to the beginning about how sports has been delegated, I think the stats are 111.5 million people watch the Super Bowl over everything else in the world. And sports dominates. So whether it falls into, what part. I met Chip Kelly, and I said, you're me with hair. You're short and round and close to the ground. You never shut up. But he'll own this town, no matter what pace. And I think it would be very hard to get those rules changed.
the other thing too about the coverage issue, excuse me, is that nowadays sports is 2 minutes long, just long enough to show 3 highlights, a quick generic soundbite, and the anchor has to be young, blonde, pretty female who may or may not know anything about sports. So that is the requisite today.
But
so
she speaks English and sometimes Spanish.
So, issues like details about, rule changes and so forth really don't get coverage on television.
By the way, I think that NBC 10 might be the largest network station in the country that got rid of their sports department. And so, Bill Schul's back there. Did that go over well?
Well, that happened after I left, but in talking to people there since I left, they're beside themselves.
Yeah.
And they're not happy. I mean, John Clark is in Comcast Sportsnet, he's doing fine, and FI is anchoring news.
But I think you're going to see this a lot more. I think you're going to see a lot of local newscasts getting rid of sports. A lot of independent stations have done it, but that was the first major network station to get rid of their sportscasts.
But don't you beautiful girls give up, because we were the first school locally to appoint a sports information director, Rosa Gaddy. And there was Rosa went from Villanova to Brown. And I'll never forget her phone call. She said, Mar, I just got a call from some guys who are starting a sports network called ESPN. up in New York by Getty Oil, right? And I said, Rosie, do you play Monopoly? She said, what's that mean? I said, do not stop at Go, do not collect $200, go right to New York. And she ended up retiring as one of their big executives. So don't give up hope. There might be a lot of jockeying around, but there are sports networks now. And you're right, and I think the ladies do a super job. So I'm just,
Sports on TV is bigger than it's ever been.
yeah.
It's just not in the local newscast.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, when you say don't give up to the young ladies, there are, for example, I had a brief opportunity when I was at Fox to do sideline reporting on NFL games for the network, and I found out what a joke that really is, because they don't let you go anywhere near the bench. The first time I did it there, the Eagles actually assigned a guy, like a security guard, to stay with me so that I did not go near the bench. I could only go as far as the 30-yard line. And then if a player got injured, I could not go up the tunnel to see what was happening. What would happen is the team would call the truck, the Fox truck, tell them what the injury was. The director in the truck would tell me in my ear what the injury was, and I would go on camera and say, oh, here's what's happening. So it was such a crock after my first year, I didn't even want to do it anymore. So
If I was there, I'd let you play. I would say, but you're in.
I actually one time had a phone call from, I actually broke the rule and went to the locker room to see about an injury to a Giants running back. And I got a little bit of information, and as I was coming back, walking past the Eagles bench, and this is in the late 90s, somebody says to me, come here. I'm like, what? Phone call for you. I'm like, what? I'm walking past the Eagles bench on the sidelines, and yes, they had a phone, and this is before cell phones. They had, a desk phone on the bench. Guy hands it to me. It's the public relations director up in the booth. You ever go up there again, I'm going to have you thrown off the field. I'm a sideline reporter for the Fox network. If you go past the 30-yard line again, I'm going to have security throw you out. And he's screaming and yelling at me. That was back in the days when good old Ron Howard was the Eagles guy. Remember him, Al? So so as far as being able to do that job, pretty much anybody can do it. And it really doesn't require any kind of knowledge. So you have some women such as Pam Oliver and Michelle Tafoya who really know their stuff and have been doing it for years and proven themselves. And then you have others like the Erin Andrews type who are there just because they're pretty and blonde. And it's kind of the same way with local sports now. With 2 minutes of sports, you don't really have to know anything. So therefore, pretty much anybody can do it. And other than mispronouncing a name here and there, like the young lady who said Jim Boeheim the other day, the Syracuse coach Jim Boeheim, when Jim Boeheim has been a star, nationally known figure probably longer than she's been alive. But I'm certainly not trying to come down on women, because there are those who do it and who are there because of their skills, and there are those who are there because they're pretty. Because the job really doesn't, the way it is now, really doesn't require you to have any great skill or knowledge of sports.
You should point out there's just as many guys who are there because of the way they look.
Who?
As women.
Who's a good-looking sports guy, Larry? In
Harry.
this market?
That's the great thing about radio,
No,
right?
I didn't mean in this market. I mean, across the country. There have been people that have been put in the position certainly because of the way they look. I know, I would argue that Chris Raggi got his job up at WCBS because of the way he looked. And then he was an entertainment reporter before that. And he got his job because of the way he looked. I don't want to name a lot of names. I'm in enough trouble. I don't need to get in trouble with a bunch of people, but there are plenty of males who get the position because of the way they look. Look, when I was at WABC, they put me in the sports desk. And I was doing really well until I came across Krzyzewski's name one night and blew that. And so believe me, it's not just a sex.
You were just an anchor babe yourself, right?
Yes, I was. That's what I'm saying.
I think I'm losing control of the panel here. It's
Sorry
like
about that.
3 guys in the back of a cab discussing the world. Harry.
Hey, Joe,
go ahead.
I'm the senior member of the group. I started in television in 1954 when a brand new television station came to my hometown of Syracuse. I just got into the Air Force, and one way or another, I ended up lying like a rug, but I got a job doing the 11 o'clock sports. You know what the 11 o'clock sports was? There was 5 minutes of news, 5 minutes of weather, and 5 minutes of sports. That number has decreased over the many years. Now it's maybe 2 minutes. But I do remember the general manager saying to me before I went on the air, look, your job is to keep the people from going to the bathroom or the refrigerator. Okay? That started me off, and I haven't gotten over it yet.
Can I, Melts, when I got into KYW, I started there part-time in '73, and our sportscast would go 4 to 5 minutes in morning drive, evening, whenever. And it would include, are you ready for this? We used to do horse racing results from Delaware Park and Philly Park. Not only who won, but how much they paid. And I know but you, Jimmy, being a horse guy and your relationship with Bill Branson. Branson was a stickler, you know. And anybody here listen to Branson. I see Robin back there. And Robin was a desk assistant. And you guys used to have to bring in the horse results to be read on the air as soon as we got them. I don't know what other, I know there was no other station in town that did it. But if you know anything about it, you know, win, you pay off 3 ways, right? Like say $16, $12, and $10.40. Place, $4 and $4.60, and it would say that's okay, because somehow I never understood it. All the years I was reading that number, but Branson, you used to have to say that's okay, and it was amazing. We used to do results. Branson used to hang out at a bar someplace on the main line, Helen Siegel Wilson's bar, and a bunch of polo guys used to come in there, polo players, not guys wearing, you know, Ralph Lauren shirts, but. We used to give results of polo matches. Polo matches. Can you imagine that, Al? You never did that in Syracuse, did you?
No. There are no horses in Syracuse.
Hey, Harry, I had one better than that when I was at ABC in Washington. The general manager was a big skeet shooting fan.
Oh, boy.
And he said, where are the skeet shooting results? I said,
Wow.
I mean, they actually have competition? I mean, he didn't like that very well, but I still held on to my job. I mean,
That's right up there with the polo matches.
Oh,
I'll tell
yeah.
you.
And not only that, when I worked in Boston at ABC up there, Channel 7, we were number 3 in the market, and they brought me up there. And luckily for me, I came in with another couple of guys, and our ratings started going up and so forth. And they decided, look, if the news is a little light that night, give Joe another couple of minutes. I mean, I got as many as 7 or 8 minutes of sports at times when the producer would come to me like a half hour before airtime. Hey, can you handle another 3 minutes? 3 minutes? I got 10 minutes worth, you know, anytime you need it. You know, I was always over-producing myself. But, I mean, that's how much things have changed to what it is now. And what the executive back there says about how the industry has gone, whereby they're just getting rid of, I mean, this is the first time I've really seen this. I mean, when Larry mentions it's the first major station to just completely kill the sports department is ridiculous. I'm sorry. People are interested, if not in a national story, they're interested in the local teams. You got a lot of graduates, different schools here. They may want to find out something about Westchester or Delaware or LaSalle, all the Big 5 schools and so forth. And, you know, to me, it's almost, I hate to use the word criminal, but I mean, in one respect, it's not necessarily thinking about the public. It's thinking about some sort of a deal whereby they're apparently trying to make more money, and quite frankly, it baffles me.
And Joe,
Harry.
Joe, you touched something, because you were talking about the Sixers earlier, and they did a beautiful thing with a special needs kid, Michael Groh, signed him to a two-day contract. It's gone viral and all those things. He's going to be on several more shows. That story is so real, so Philly, so sports, so everything. For that kid to make a few shots at the end of the game and say all kids are special. So the power of sport for good, and I've seen it all my life. And you know what? Did it take away from the Sixers? Not at all. It complemented the fact that they are having a tough season, but they have enough heart to say, hey, this was a special kid doing a special thing, and it's not just Philly, it's gone all over the country.
Yeah.
You're not getting too many smiles from the table next to you.
I figured they think I'm anti-women, but I'm not. It's just that part of the game that slows it up, and they don't have a damn thing to say. The best one of all of them, I guess, is Susie Colbert, and you don't see enough of her.
That's a classic answering your own question, Eddie. But,
Well done,
Eddie.
legend.
Eddie, I heard an executive in New York say one time, or I read it, he said, I will put the best-looking woman I can find on the air at any time, any place, so that the men will keep watching. I mean, I don't know what that tells you, but...
Is he in the big coffin in the sky?
Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
I'm going to dodge, Joe, I'm going to dodge Ed's question, even though I love Ed so much. Think about this, everybody. I think we'll have a point of agreement here. Ed and I were talking about with my brother on the way up here that if it was Big Al Meltzer at the Palestra bringing you the game, did you not feel like you were there? Incredible. And I'm not just being gratuitous to this legend to my left. I loved watching Palestra, Big Five. These games were so competitive. It was incredible. It was amazing. Joe Pellegrino, for his more than quarter of a century in the Philly market, if you look at the great sports broadcasters, whether they be announcers or anchors, they were the face of the radio station or the television station. Big Al was the biggest thing wherever he was. Joe Pellegrino, I guarantee you, if market data was done, he would be the big guy. Now we're talking about relegation, like it's not a red-haired stepchild, like it doesn't even count. Any robot can read 2 minutes on a teleprompter if you can pronounce Mike Krzyzewski or Jim Boeheim or any of these things. It's kind of sad, isn't it? It's terrible.
I'm going to do something now that'll probably make me the guy no one ever wants to talk to again. Here's the way it goes at halftime in an NFL game. The girl, blonde and very good looking, and the coach who is trying to get into his locker room, right? I mean, he's got to, because the league says you got to go on the air. So the first question has always been, Coach, you're only down by 40 points. What are you going to ask your team to do? He takes one look and says, I don't know, and then runs like hell into the locker room.
Well, sometimes they work in a second question as he's running. But okay, let's move on to how would we cover the Phillies today into a newscast when there are a lot of baseball fans in this town. This used to be a great baseball city. It's obviously an Eagles town, but the Phillies are right there. And they've got an aging team. They've got a new manager. They've got guys coming off injuries. They just, I think, made a very good move. I was hoping they would sign A.J. Burnett. They did. I think he'll give them 12 to 15 wins. And he's got a power arm and one of the best curveballs in the league, and he's a ground ball pitcher in a small ballpark. So, Harry, how would you handle the Phillies in integrating it within a newscast?
well, it's obviously, as we saw during the years that they were winning pennants and going to the World Series and everything, it's a hot story. As soon as they start to lose, people can't wait until Eagles training camp opens, okay? So it all depends. If they get off to a hot start and come August 1st, they're still in the hunt, Phillies are going to be a big story. It's going to be reflected in every media outlet in town. If they're not, they're history, and it's wait till next year. The thing that continues to amaze me about baseball is, and we've seen this up close and personal with the Phillies, is the injuries that these guys get. And like, for instance, now Hamels comes down. They say, oh, it's no big deal. Well, it's big enough that he says he's not going to make opening day. And opening day is what, March 30th or something like that? So
Yeah, March.
we're talking
March
about
31st.
6 weeks from the time he announced that. He already knew he wasn't going to pitch on opening day. And then we saw Halladay break down a couple times. Obviously, Ryan Howard got hurt. I mean, I hate to sound like an old fogey, but you go back to when Roberts pitched 340 innings a year and had 29 or 30 complete games. I mean, a bullpen was for washed-up guys. Now, of course, they make $15 million as a closer. But I guess my point is, why is it we have the best medical facilities for these players? They have training rooms. They don't need spring training to lose 25 pounds that they put in the offseason. Why is it they break down at relatively young ages when there's so much money and so much depending on them? I don't get it.
I think, Joe, a lot of it has to do with, Harry, the types of pitches they throw, and it's usually the pitchers who break down. And nowadays, probably at least 1/4 of the starting pitchers in the league have had Tommy John surgery by the time they're 25, which means they have to miss a season and a half, and get tendons replaced and all of that. So I think it's because of the different types of pitches they throw. Nobody throws 300 innings anymore. It just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. And not only that, but they're also, I can remember as a kid, they used to say, don't let a kid throw a breaking ball until he was like 12 or 14 years old. Now these kids are, watching television. They have coaches that are showing them how to throw sliders. And it's probably not so much what they're throwing now. It's the fact that they've been throwing these types of pitches before they're even developed.
Right.
Maybe that's part of the problem.
Well, I tell you, you can look back years ago, back in the 50s and so forth, DiMaggio and Williams and those guys used to go to spring training to get into shape. You've got to be in shape when you get to spring training now. That means they're working those muscles almost year-round. In those days, they had 3 or 4 months off. Phil Rizzuto, the great shortstop of the Yankees, when the season was over, he had a job in a haberdashery store to sell suits. And a lot of guys had different jobs. A couple of guys were truck drivers, but they let their muscles rest for 3 months, and maybe it was just a question of wear and tear, because these guys are throwing different pitches, as Billy said, and it's a lot of strain on different arms. But Harry, what's your thought?
I agree with Joe that it was a great pickup, A.J. Burnett. He did very, very poor for the Yankees, but the American League is different. He was very good for the Pirates. I think it's a good one-year signing. The problem I have with the Phillies right now, it's a little bit like they're a mini New York Yankees. They're building an older team instead of getting younger. When you look at who's ready for the playoffs, it's the younger teams. It's the teams that have that 2 stud starting pitchers, because you don't need that many, but you need enough during the regular season to make it to the playoffs. They're adding more teams. I think more teams are going to build for the playoffs, and not what the Yankees have done and what the Phillies are doing right now, and sort of building the older team for the regular season. It doesn't make sense, especially when the injuries are probably going to come along. Love Charlie Manuel, thought he was great, but I think Ryan Sandberg is going to bring energy, and I think he's going to do very, very well.
Al, how would we cover the Phillies nowadays?
They go down there for the entire time. We used to go down for a week, maybe a week and a half, and get all the video we could use. These guys are on live every night. If you're live in Florida, you ain't living here in Philadelphia. True? So you say to yourself, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Baseball has gone in a great direction. The Phillies broadcast rights are now owned by Comcast, okay? They have just given the Phillies $24 billion for the next 20 years. $1 billion. The United States didn't have that much money 100 years ago. But what it does, it gives them the opportunity to pay whatever it takes to get the talent. And the bigger the market and the more the money, the better it's going to be. And I leave you really here with one thought. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and at the end, in the final chapter, I said, what is sports going to be? So I said, well, the first thing it's going to be is Comcast is going to do all of the sports in Philadelphia. Now, it hasn't happened yet. It's happened at one station, but they will give you whatever you want, probably a low charge, and you get your 2 minutes on your TV station. And that's all it's ever going to be. The main thing is, and here's what you got to worry about. TV has taken over sports to the point where I mentioned $24 billion. The next step will be there will no longer be network sports. Each league will have its own network, and you will not get it on the same network station in every city in America. It's the one that bids the most. So from this point on, you'll get so much sports you can't handle it, but then that's the way it's going to go. It's money, money, money. And for the guy who wants to get into sports announcing at this stage of his life, go get it. It's a hell of a job.
Larry?
Yeah, just a few quick points. First of all, one of the reasons that I don't want to dump on NBC 10, because one of the reasons they're able to get rid of their sports department is because they have CSN and they use them for their sports. And you're going to be seeing a whole lot more of that. NBC does that with CNBC. NBC does that throughout the network. They have a whole other network that deals with a topic, and then they just bring in those resources. It's actually a pretty good strategy. When you talk about how it would be handled, you're absolutely right, Harry, is that it depends on how well the team is doing, and that doesn't have to do a whole lot with sports coverage. It has more to do with branding. It has more to do with being a part of the community and saying, we're just like you, we're rooting on this team. So you'll get very little sports coverage and all that. You'll get fans decorating their houses. You'll get people out in the street with signs. You'll get very little sports coverage. To Al's point about going down and covering the teams, actually nowadays, people don't even go to the games. It's very rare that the sports anchor you watch went to the game that night. They went out to dinner. And so in many ways, sports departments at TV stations did this to themselves. And one last point about the $24 billion. It was a great deal for Comcast. It might not have been a great deal for the Phillies, because in market to market, teams are now owning their own TV markets, their own cable stations. The Yes Network in New York is much more profitable than the New York Yankees. And so teams across the country are figuring out, why do we sell our rights when we can keep our rights and make the money and then build a stronger team and not have to care about the luxury tax? So I'm not sure in the long run that's a great deal for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah, that remains to be seen. Billy?
Philadelphia sports fans are so pessimistic about the Phillies this year. I mean, it's unbelievable. Because I listen to sports talk radio every day, and nobody thinks they're even going to be a 500 team. And I got a news flash about Philadelphia fans for you, and I'm not putting them down because Broadcast Pioneers was nice enough to let me a few months ago get up and talk about the book that I had written, co-authored, about Philadelphia fans and how great fans are, and how the national media maligns us. But it is true that we do have a tendency to either be way, way up, we're gonna win it all, or to be way, way down, we're gonna suck, right? So right now everybody thinks the Phillies are gonna suck. But, and obviously they are an old team, and it just depends on how healthy they stay, whether they can be competitive at all or not. But what Big Al said reminds me of how, yeah, I remember when I went down to Clearwater to cover the Phillies, and we worked from 7 a.m. until dusk, and when I came back, we had so much stuff that we were able to run it for the next month on the air. But when we sent our other guy down, and I don't want to pile on him because he was all over the news yesterday, but he went down to Clearwater, and the first day sent us back a soundbite from the manager. And then the next day sent us a soundbite from the manager. And the third day sent us a soundbite from the manager. And I was watching, I said, you know, Francona's in the exact same spot in the dugout on each of these soundbites. And I think I finally figured out that the thing that was going on was go down there first day, interview the manager, spend the rest of the week or 10 days on the beach, and just keep cutting different sound bites from the same interview.
Well, I started in baseball, and I want, especially the young people, we're talking about the evolution of the revolution. When Al started quoting the rights fees, I used to do the contracts at the Eagles. And the agents always started with the same line, Jimmy, it's not about the money. And I said, good, then it's about the cash. It's always about the money. And that does change a lot of things, as long as we understand. You guys live in an era that we didn't know what apps were. We didn't have all these computers. And I think it's just adjusting. I think everything that's been said up here really, really means something. But I went into baseball because at college, the coach of the baseball team became my mentor, Art Mahan. And to this day, everything that happened to me in sports, and they were great storytellers. And I started in minor league baseball. I went to the old Sally League. I met my wife at the politically incorrect Atlanta Crackers baseball team, the old St. Louis Cardinal team 52 years ago, March 25th. I mean, changed my life. Sports and the tradition and what these guys do. And I would say the one great thing that sports can do is take a cause and take it to the next level. The Phillies gave away $2 million this year in their sports foundation. The Flyers' wives, fantastic. Bobby Clark came over. John Brogan was their PR guy with a bunch of $20 bills when we started Eagles 5 Leukemia. He says, our guys just collected this. They heard about your charity. And a year and a half later, Barry Ashby, their coach, got sick, and those women have raised $25 million. So when you look at the Flyers, the Eagles, the Phillies, everybody has really gotten into the community and become part of it. So with all the imperfection, there are always going to be people watching the Phillies. And you're right. Trying to explain a Phillies fan to when you're signing somebody was one of my greatest challenges and one of my happiest moments. So I agree. Go ahead.
I just want to pick up on something Billy triggered a memory I had about how certain guys cover sports. It was '80, Jim, when the Eagles were down in New Orleans for the Super Bowl. And KYW sent me down there to cover, obviously. And we were owned at the time by Westinghouse. So Group W had a pool reporter that would file reports to all the group stations. And the fellow was Gil Santos. Now, Gil Santos, I'm sure people up here know who he was. He worked at WBZ in Boston, and he was the voice of the Patriots, but he was the pool reporter for the Super Bowl. So with the first day of news conferences, the Eagles were out in the Hilton, I think, by the airport. I forget where the Raiders were. Yeah. And anyway, Gil came up to me and he said, "You're from Philadelphia, KYW?" He said, "Yeah." "You going to be going to all these news conferences?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you mind doing me a favor?" He said, "Would you let me have the tape at the end of the day and listen to it? And, you know, if you're going to do both teams?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, that'd be great. I'll meet you back here at the hotel at 4 o'clock. Okay. So covered all the news conferences. You know, one in town, one all the way out by the airport, running around like a chicken without my head, and making sure I met Mr. Santos to give him the tapes. Well, here, Gil wasn't going to any news conferences. He wasn't covering diddly. All he did was take a couple bites off of my audio tape and feed them to the group. And everybody thought he was working his can off, you know? But I learned after about the third day, like Thursday, I said, "Hey, Gil, I'm not going to the..." "Why not? Why not?" He had to actually get up and work, you know? But that was my first introduction to Gil Santos, yeah, who has since retired, I think. And now Merrill is the longest tenured play-by-play voice in the NFL.
Are you sure he's retired? I mean, I knew Gil when I worked
You know,
in Boston.
Gil, well, he did the Celtics. He did everything.
Yeah, no, he and Merrill were tied for the longest constant broadcaster
Right. No, he's done.
play-by-play in the
He's
NFL.
done now.
He did quit?
Him and
Okay,
Gino
well,
Capoletti,
Now
yeah.
Merrill is the number one guy as far as I think it's like 38 years in a row as a play-by-play guy of a football team.
Yeah.
But we're going back to the baseball. You know that there's a Major League Baseball network. And if you want to watch your local team in any part of the country, you can get that service for a nominal fee or whatever the heck they're charging, and you can get all of their games no matter where you live. If you live in Oklahoma City and you're a San Diego fan, you can watch the San Diego Padres play every night if you're, if you've bought the Major League Baseball network. So that's how things have changed. The sports networks right now just dominate everything. I mean, ESPN, I'm sure that's why Channel 10 decided, look, we can't even compete with those sports networks, so we're just going to join them rather than fight them. And that's basically where we are. Before we get to questions, we got let's get on to the 76ers, and somebody figure out to me, have the Sixers really, because we knew they weren't going to be any good, but how can you trade off anything that resembles box office attraction, such as scorers like Iguodala, and some of the other guys that they've gotten rid of, Drew Holiday, and put a bunch of guys out there that just cannot compete in today's game. Who wants to start? Jimmy, why don't we start you down at that end? And how would you run the Sixers in a rebuilding year?
Well, I think they're trying the best thing. They're trying to tell the truth. And, it's the old movie, in Scripture, St. John says the truth shall set you free. And not so saintly Jack Nicholson says you can't handle the truth. So somewhere between those two things, they're telling the truth. They're trying to get the draft choices. They're trying to build for next year. And it's hard going through the pain of watching lose by 88 points in 2 games. That's hard. I don't care who you are, what you're and the people come there and, they want to see you play the best you can with who you can. So I think they have a big challenge. Plus, I don't think it helped that the owner bought a team in another town. Other than that, I think everything's fine.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, to me, it's an embarrassment to be able to lose these games, and how people can actually continue to pay for it. I mean, I know they've probably already bought their season tickets, don't have a choice, but I'm sure this is not sitting well with dyed-in-the-wool 76er fans. Billy?
Well, to me, I don't have a problem with it, Joe. I mean, obviously, you're not real happy about it, but to use a football term and apply it to basketball, I think sometimes you have to punt. And there's a reason, you have to be willing to take your loss now in order to get better later. And there's a reason why the term has been coined in the NBA, salary cap hell. Because if you're one of those teams that is somewhere in the middle, you're not real good, you're not real bad, you don't get great draft choices, but you also don't make the playoffs, you're just kind of stuck in that spot in the middle, and you have to become really bad in order to get really good, in order to get those lottery draft picks.
Well, one thing that I just don't like about the whole system is that it's flawed, because you've got to lose a lot to be able to get more ping pong balls at the end of the year at draft time, when if you get more ping pong balls, and you're still, even though you have the worst record, you're still not assured of getting the first draft choice, because you may have 18 ping pong balls, the other guy may have 7, but he gets that one number that comes out that says number 1, and he gets the first choice. To me, they've got to come up with some other kind of system to take the word tank, which means lose on purpose, out of the whole measure of what they're doing. And I don't know what system they can come up with, but it just bothers me that the word tank continues to override the whole system. Larry?
I love what they're doing. And because they would have been a below average to average team for the next 20 years. The last time they competed was when they got the #1 draft pick and they got Allen Iverson. You have to get draft picks because they don't have the money to go after the top free agents, and the top free agents, as we've seen, want to go to teams that can compete for the championship. So last year, they got arguably the best guy in the draft. They got a great point guard, and now they're going into the deepest draft, maybe the last 20 years, with 2 picks in the first round, possibly 2 picks in the top 12, and maybe the top pick. And so there you're going to have 4 stars, possibly 2 superstars, and that's the only chance you have to win a championship, with a couple of superstars.
By the way, speaking of money, as I have today, in case you don't know, the 3 owners, Penn graduates, are billionaires. And this is the first year they've done something like buying a sports franchise. One of 2 things will happen. They'll give up in about another year or 2, or they're going to be the best damn basketball team in the NBA.
All right, remains to be seen.
Larry is exactly right. So is Big Al. It's, I guess you call it reloading. It is smart. It's terrible to go through at the time. This reminds me, and I know he's a good friend of probably a lot of people in this room, a good friend of mine, Pat Croce, right before he took over as president. The Sixers weren't very good then either. And then they got very good. And they were an NBA final caliber team. Couldn't handle the West, but they handled the East. One of the things that was a little bit cruel, it might go by sort of forgotten by now, but that early start with this young talent that everyone assumed they were going to be terrible, but then they beat the Heat and they had a couple of big wins. And then all of a sudden, people had a whole new expectation. Did you forget about that? It's easy to forget about that, but that was a terrible thing that happened. They should have just been the terrible team that they are, and I think there would have been no disappointment. Joe's right. It feels like they're tanking, but they're not. The perception is that they are. They're just a bad team. They can't compete, so they're going to lose. They're going to lose almost every night. They'll win a handful of games. Larry hit the nail on the head when he said they could have been mediocre. It's wonderful in the Atlantic Division to be 3, 4, 8, 9 games under 500, and you get the 8th spot and you're in the playoffs. You're not a success. It's a joke. So they reload. They get great draft picks, as Larry said, and they're going to be a good team within a couple of years. I do note this. Coaching means a lot to me. Larry Brown, no matter what the talent was, he could win. Doug Collins, very underrated coach. Could have had great success in Chicago. He could have been Phil Jackson. It's a shame. Personality thing with him and Michael. But I don't know about the coach now. I don't know if this is the coach for the future, but the future is bright for the Sixers. And it's going to happen sooner than people think, I believe.
Yeah, Harry.
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm not a big NBA guy. I don't like the league. I think it ought to do away with the 24-second clock and put in a 35-second clock like college, because I think 24 seconds, they come over half court, there's one pass, and then there's somebody taking a shot, and they run down the other end of the court. I like the college game much more better. Having said that, 76ers, and we've seen it, you go back, they've traded more superstars and made more bad trades, I think, than any franchise in this town of the other sports. When you go back to trading Wilt, and I realize that was a forced issue, but they got rid of Wilt Chamberlain, arguably the best player that ever lived. Charles Barkley later for a guy, they picked up, traded Moses Malone for a guy that hardly played for him. It's like the Bynum thing when they picked up Rulon. You talk about this franchise. Will they recover? Yeah, they will. But this is a franchise. Noel hasn't played a second and won't this year. He was their first pick later. And they knew going in he wasn't going to play. How do you do that? Okay, for the future, maybe. I thought it was stupid. And the other thing, Bynum never played. That's 2 years in a row. Their two biggest out-of-season acquisitions haven't played 1 second. To me, that's bad management, plain and simple.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I'm not saying that they're tanking on purpose. I'm just saying that they are so
No, they're bad.
They're a bad team. They can't compete.
And management's to blame.
I mean, hell, Villanova will give them a good game and maybe beat them. All right. We can talk quickly about the Flyers if you want. Ed Snyder said that the Olympics interrupts the NHL season. Anybody have a thought on that, or do you think the Flyers
it
are in
didn't
the right
interrupt
direction?
Alex Ovechkin's season. He'll be back in Washington tonight, I think, won't he? After losing today
Probably.
to Russia.
Do
Yeah.
you believe in miracles? That was the greatest game of all time. Nobody knew where Lake Placid was. Nobody knew what Olympic hockey was.
I was there.
And they were all
One of
amateurs,
the greatest
Jimmy.
nights I ever saw in sports.
But do you ever notice, though, when you take off 3 weeks in anything, you sometimes aren't the same team that you were 3 weeks before. Some other team might be better. They may have gotten healthier. A team that was playing great, you see teams playing great before an all-star break, all of a sudden they're a little bit different. You never know. 3 weeks is probably too long, but Jim is very compelling down there with the, it's hard to be against the Olympics.
Well, I think the biggest thing about them this year is that they've got some goaltending. I'm sorry. go
I
ahead.
got a word about the guy that owns the hockey team. I wouldn't listen to what he has to say. He owns one franchise. He'd rather own all of them. You're talking about the biggest ego of all time.
You're not a fan, Al.
No, not at all.
How do you really feel, Al?
Not bad. It's been a nice afternoon. Oh, one other thing. I got to do this before anything else.
Big Al, have you ever heard of Jerry Jones?
Yeah, but Jerry Jones has had winners. We've owned 2 Stanley Cups in the 80 years we've been, well, how many years? We're in the hockey. But I want to go back to the ladies, seriously. I have 4 daughters, all right? At no time in my 50 years in the business have I ever said to myself, I don't feel like going to work today. And no matter what you do and all the things you will hear, I would tell you this. You're never going to have a better job than in broadcasting. It doesn't have to be an announcer. It can be a general manager. It can be the network. But it's the greatest profession in the world. Thank you.
Yep. All right, I don't particularly want to get on this subject, but anybody got any feeling about the gay football player who is about to be drafted into the National Football League? Well, let me tell you something. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and in when I covered the Washington Redskins, that's where I grew up. There was a great tight end that they had named Jerry Smith. He was gay. Nobody knew it. He was a great guy, good guy to talk to in the locker room. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, whatever they do, wherever they go, that's their business. They also had a running back named Ray McDonald, great big black running back, and it turned out that he wasn't very good. He only lasted a couple of years, but he was gay. There have been innumerable players who have had checkered pasts in professional football. And some have said, well, we'll have to see how it works out in the locker room and so forth. It's 50-50 in a lot of the NFL locker rooms. And one said, well, why don't we all just sit down at the very beginning and lay down some rules and we'll go from there, which sounds pretty normal. So what do you guys think is going to be happening here when this young man, Sam, out of the University of Missouri, who is a defensive end who will be looked at in the National Football League as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 defense?
Well, if he can play, he's going to play. And I think all the peripheral coverage, because it's a topical, subject that is getting a lot of play in various walks of life, be it equality, marriage, and now why is sports any different? I mean, I grew up in the same era, Joe, and there were, I'm sure, several players who at the time we didn't know were gay, and nobody knew about it. Maybe their teammates didn't even know about it. This kid's teammates have known about it for how long? Oh, I'm surprised it was able to be kept, quote, a secret when he told them back in August.
Yeah, some said
which
it was
is,
old
I
news.
think that's a bigger story than the fact now that he's coming out, and this was all contrived. I mean, this was all, he hired a public relations guy to set up the interviews with ESPN and the New York Times and all that. So, the way that was handled, it's just like any other story now. That's what you got to do, and you control the message. And he controlled the message, and we'll see. The shelf life on that, I think, is done. Now it's going to be a matter for him to go out there and play.
Would you put it in the sportscast?
The draft is next.
The draft is next. And
I think he hurt himself in the draft.
Yeah.
he may have. A lot of people think he didn't. But, yeah, you're right. If it comes down
publicly
to
they'll say he
him.
didn't. But then when there's anonymous sources in
Right.
the league office,
And
they
I
say
think
he
you're right.
did, because why would you want that problem?
Right.
And how can you possibly cut him now?
Well,
What
that's
if he
the other.
can't
That's
play?
where he may have hurt himself or helped himself. Even if he's drafted 8th, if they cut him, how can you cut this kid? Is it
Yeah.
because he's revealed his sexual?
But they
preference?
say he can play.
Well, but he's not Jackie Robinson. I mean, it's not like he's a great player. He's in the middle of the pack.
Correct.
And so if you are going to be the 123rd player picked, it's easy now to make the 135th player who plays your same position the 123rd player.
But
and
harder
you keep
maybe
moving
to cut
down.
him. Harder to cut him as the 135th.
So why take him on?
Well,
Because
I don't know.
if he can't play, you're
He's
stuck with him.
created
Well,
that dilemma for
I
those
remember a
teams.
Redskin linebacker named Chris Handberger who was picked in the 16th round and turned out to be an all-pro most of his career. So obviously they don't go that many rounds anymore. Harry?
Just a quick comment. I agree with everything that Harry said until he ended it with, it's over. It's not over. And it won't be over if he is drafted and if he makes an NFL team. Did anybody wonder why Tim Tebow is not in the NFL? He's not the greatest quarterback, but he did take the Denver Broncos to the playoffs and won a playoff game. He's not in the NFL because, I don't want to say this because I think he's a great guy, but it's a locker room cancer kind of thing. The media obsesses. And who in this room, if we're just thinking it to ourselves, doesn't believe that the media will be all over this all the time? It's like the team that is the team selected. What's that program called when you're the team picked in the NFL and they cover you for a whole season?
Hard Knocks.
Hard Knocks. There it is. Thank you, Billy. It's going to be like that every day, every moment, at practice, before games, at halftime, after the game. And it's a shame. I'm not even getting into the merits of the question of orientation. Like Larry said, I don't know why I came out before the draft, because I totally agree. Every owner, every GM, oh, we're picking by talent. This has no bearing. We do cybermetrics. We do, combine. We do all this. Come on. It's absolutely. They're just not going to say it because you can't legally say it. But I think there's a direct analogy between Sam and Tim Tebow, and that's why Tim Tebow's not in the league. I think someone will draft this player. It almost seems to be a moral imperative that you must draft this player. But I also agree with what Larry said. We're talking about somebody that might go in the third, fourth, fifth round, and a third round might be the lowest. So again, it's not the question of orientation. I don't think it should have come out the way that it did, and I think that maybe somebody's gaming somebody here. It's almost like you have to pick me now. Maybe. I'm not sure of that, but I said it.
You know what's going to happen? How many of you have seen 44, the Jackie Robinson story?
42.
42.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
42. Loved it. Well, it goes the older you get. And he proved, and it was a tough road, showered by himself, got his own piece in the locker room. Nobody wanted to go with him. He had a whole baseball team that didn't want him in the locker room. And yet, he was a hell of a player. Now, this guy is not going to be Jackie Robinson, but it may be the very beginnings of when people, athletes of course, learn that there's more to life than what they're doing right now.
Here, here.
I agree with you, but I hate the comparison to Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson came into the league when there was still deep racism across the country in cities like Philadelphia. I think the tide has turned on gay rights. I think that there's more acceptance than there is non-acceptance. And so it's what Jackie Robinson did was incredible. What Jackie Robinson did was phenomenal. He changed the world. This kid's not changing the world.
But and I'll keep this short because I know we're up against the time, but here's the reason he had to come out. Different players, Cordell Stewart, quarterback in Pittsburgh for many years, was a particular example. Constantly throughout his career, had people making innuendos, questioning his sexuality, are you gay? He had to constantly deal with that nonsense. So now Michael Sam is just coming out and saying, yes, I'm gay. Put it out on the table, leave it alone. Now just leave it alone. We have progressed as a society. And football locker rooms tend to be way behind, but hopefully the locker room has progressed to the point where everybody will just accept his sexuality. And as somebody pointed out, the media is going to be the one that's going to constantly keep it alive. But they would do that anyway, just like they did with Cordell Stewart. So he came out, he said, this is the reality. And now let's just move on and be accepting and understand that everybody has rights and move on.
I'm going to quote my lookalike, George Costanza. Not that I see anything wrong with it, but I really think that's it. We live in a time, and who's going to judge anybody? I mean, I think, when you say checkered past, this is who this man is. He put it out there, and we'll see what happens.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If he starts dropping, and he's not getting picked, and it goes to the 5th round, the 6th round, the 7th round, the 8th round, does the NFL step in because of image problems?
The NFL won't, but it'll be the Billy Crystal, analyze this, analyze that. He's going to get drafted because he sacked all those guys. He's going to get drafted.
Boston, come on, Al. New England has already said, the ownership, if he's available, we'll draft him.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Okay, so
That
there's
doesn't
no,
surprise me.
he's going to get on a pro team.
I didn't doubt that. I'm just talking about when.
Play it again, Sam.
All right, I just handed some scores here. In the Olympics, Canada 2-1 over Latvia, and the United States against Czech Republic 5-2 USA. Let's throw it out to a couple of questions before we wrap it up. You had your hand up for some time.
A couple of points. First of all, I think a good analogy might be Manti Te'o.
They have come to that conclusion. Seriously. Down the road, they just won't have it because you can get it everywhere you want to dial up a station. So, I mean, you're on the right track. That's what's going to happen.
But I would argue also you can get all the local news
Exactly.
off of an app, and you can get that the whole idea of a local broadcast newscast is dying. Yep. And you brought up a great point in that it used to be you look for the personalities. That's what they need to go back to. Because cable news has figured that out. Cable news, during the recession, even the internet went down in revenue. Cable news went up. Broadcast news went down. Broadcast news right now, 5 years ago, the late newscasts got almost 40% of the local market. That's down to 16% right now. All the newscasts together, down to 16%. They're dying, and they're not doing anything to change except getting rid of sports, which is insane. It's just insane. This all happened, by the way, and I don't mean to take too much time, but this all happened before cable news came around. It happened with consultants who misread research, where they said that weather was 82% of the reason people watched local news, and sports was only 20%. So we're going to diminish sports. I'll take a 20. I'll take a 20 rating if I could get those sports people to watch me. You don't drive anybody away. So not only was their audience taken, they drove their audience away. But getting personalities like Bill O'Reilly, Chris Matthews, Rachel Maddow, creating stars, making somebody you need to get perspective from, that's how you can save local news.
I came to Philly in 1981 as the sports producer for Channel 6 when Gary Papa and Scott Palmer came on. And we launched the 5 o'clock news talking to people.
Let me get in here one more time, because I started in the business before any of you were, a lot of you weren't even born, I'm sorry. Here's the deal. Now, you get into a situation where you have a format, and it's good for 25 years, as it has been here in Philadelphia. Do you know what they lead with in the first 8 minutes of the Channel 6 newscast? What we started with when there wasn't any video cameras, or anything else, and did a newscast at 11 o'clock with what? Fires, crashes, killings, whatever, right? Okay. What do they lead tonight? They'll lead tonight with fires, crashes, killings, and whatever. And they're still number one in the marketplace. So maybe it'll change, maybe it won't change.
But it's like being the tallest midget at this point. I mean, the ratings are so diminished.
What about Cecily Tynan? That's a
That's
whole
true.
other, whether or not.
But just a quick comment. Even if you don't lead, I'm old school in some of these areas. I'll give you an idea. If I travel to New England, they're watching Nesson and not ESPN. I like the Yes Network as opposed to something else. They'll put on NBC, Sportsnet, or ESPN 15. It's getting crazy with all these channels. But if you give them what they want, I think a community, if we bring it down to everything is local, they like their local personalities. Because if you cover the score of the game from some stranger's point of view, it'll be very different than when it's your person giving you the news. So I think there is still a home for this, and I think that branded properly, it's going to come back. I think it's cyclical in nature, and I think a lot of people that had a lot of power to make decisions about what goes and what should stay didn't really know what they were talking about.
And that's why.
Harry, you just read my mind, because
you have 69% of your market. So I think you
It's
live
local.
that. Well, that's it.
If
but
we
I think
put
you live
on,
it.
I will beat Rush Limbaugh head to head.
Yeah, well, I love that.
And look at his numbers.
Yeah.
But I beat him. I've already done it. I'm in mourning for most of my career, but I beat him because people want local as opposed to some stranger that's not invested, that they don't care about, that, as everybody on this panel has been saying, mispronounces names. Isn't it embarrassing when you know your team and someone's saying the name all wrong and doesn't know who plays what positions? So the gentleman's question was great, but I think the decisions were made that just were short-sighted and didn't take into consideration passion. If you have a 2-minute element, make it mean something. If it doesn't have to be 5-7 minutes like in the Joe Pellegrino era, then make it 2 great minutes with a local person that knows what they're talking about and invest in that.
Well, see, that was the difference when there was no cable, and Big Al was at Channel 3, and Tom Brookshire at Channel 10, and I was at Channel 6. We had 3 different guys who had different perspectives on the same story, and it was just a question of what personality you wanted to see to do the story, or just happen to be flipping and maybe not necessarily lock in on any one of us, but to see a different perspective. So that's how it is. We have been signaled that it's time to wrap it up. So I want to thank the panel, Jimmy, Billy, Larry, Big Al, Harry, and Harry.